Have you ever just looked out at a forest or a field and wondered about the hidden rules that are running the whole show? From the smallest bug to the biggest bear, every single living thing is part of this incredible system. And it turns out, it's all organized by one simple, powerful thing: the flow of energy. Today, we're going to pull back the curtain on that system.
And it all kicks off with a pretty simple question you've probably asked yourself. I mean, think about it. Wherever you go in nature, you see tons and tons of plants, right? A decent number of plant eaters like deer or rabbits. But you almost never see the top predators like wolves or lions. Why is that? Why isn't the planet just crawling with wolves? Well, the answer, believe it or not, comes down to the basic physics of energy.
So, here's our game plan. We're going to start with the absolute basics, the fuel that runs this entire system. Then, we'll climb what's called the food ladder, meet the key players, and then we're going to uncover this incredibly simple but powerful mathematical rule that shapes everything. We'll even take a quick look at the cleanup crew of the ecosystem, and then finally, we'll see how it all stacks up into this inevitable and really elegant pyramid.
Okay, first things first. Every single ecosystem on this planet is built around one central question: how do organisms get their energy? That's it. That's the organizing principle. To live, to grow, to do anything, life needs fuel, and that fuel has to come from somewhere. When you get right down to it, life gets its energy in one of two ways. First, you've got your self-feeders. We call them autotrophs. These are the geniuses like plants and algae that literally make their own food from sunlight. Amazing. And then there's everybody else, the other feeders, or heterotrophs. They get their energy by eating other living things. And for this explainer, they're the ones we're really going to focus on.
So a heterotroph is just the scientific name for what we all call a consumer. You, me, that squirrel in your backyard, a mushroom on a log, we're all consumers. And here is the absolute key. Every single time a consumer eats something, it's not just filling its stomach, it's performing an energy transfer. That food is packed with chemical energy, and that is the real prize.
So how are all these energy transfers organized? I mean, is it just a chaotic free-for-all out there? Nope, not at all. It actually forms a surprisingly clear hierarchy, kind of like a ladder that energy climbs, one organism at a time.
And this is that ladder. We call it the trophic ladder. Down to the very bottom, on the first rung, you've got your producers, the plants, making all that initial energy. One step up, you have primary consumers. These are the herbivores that eat the plants. Then you've got your secondary consumers, who eat the herbivores. And way up at the top, you find the tertiary consumers, the big predators that eat other carnivores. All right, so we've got the structure, we have the ladder. Now let's meet the actual players who are living on these different rungs. They all have a slightly different strategy for grabbing that all-important energy. We can basically break them down into three main groups. You've got your herbivores, like a deer or a rabbit, the plant-eating specialists. Then you have your carnivores, like a wolf or a snake, who specialize in eating other animals. And then you have the omnivores, like a bear or, well, us, who play for both teams, getting energy from plants and animals. Now, here's where it gets really interesting. These roles aren't set in stone. Take that bear, for example. When it's munching on berries, it's acting as a primary consumer, just like a deer. But when it scoops a fish out of the river, it's a secondary consumer. This kind of flexibility is what turns simple food chains into these incredibly complex and interconnected food webs. Okay, pay attention, because this next part is the absolute key to the entire mystery. There's a fundamental rule of energy transfer that explains everything. And it all comes down to the simple, high cost of just being alive. Now, to get this rule, first we need to know how scientists even measure the energy that's available in an ecosystem. They use something called biomass. It's just the total weight of all the living stuff in an area. And because all that living tissue is made of energy-rich molecules, biomass is basically just a great way to measure stored chemical energy.
All right, so that leads us to a massive question. When a wolf eats a deer, it's consuming all that biomass, all that stored energy. But here's the crazy part. It does not get to keep all of it. In fact, it loses most of it. So, where in the world does 90% of the deer's energy go?
And here it is, the magic number, 10%. That's it. On average, only about 10% of the energy from one level of the food ladder actually gets turned into new biomass on the next level up. A mind-boggling 90% is lost at every single step. Now that 90% doesn't just vanish. Think about it. That deer spent its entire life using that energy just to live, breathing, running around, keeping its body warm.
not to mention all the energy lost as waste. So the only energy that's actually available to the wolf is the tiny fraction the deer managed to store in its own body as it grew. It's an incredible illustration of the high cost of living.
But wait a minute. What about all the stuff that doesn't get eaten? I mean, think of all the fallen leaves in a forest or animals that just die of old age. That's a lot of stored energy. It doesn't just get lost, does it? Nope. This is where the ecosystem's essential cleanup crew comes in.
And this is their job. Decomposers, like fungi and bacteria, and their buddies the detritivores, like earthworms, these guys are specialists. They break down all the dead organic stuff, unlocking the very last bits of stored energy that nobody else could get to. They are absolutely crucial for making sure that nothing goes to waste.
Okay, time for the grand finale. Let's put all the pieces together. We have the trophic ladder, and we have that crucial 10% rule. When you combine those two ideas, the entire structure of the ecosystem just snaps into focus.
So here's the big takeaway. Because you lose a whopping 90% of energy at every single step up that ladder, there is simply less energy and therefore less biomass available the higher you go. It's not a suggestion, it's a law of thermodynamics. This forces the system into a shape that can only be a pyramid.
And this pyramid structure has huge, real-world consequences. It's why food chains have to be so short, usually only 3 to 5 levels. After that, there's just not enough energy left to support another level. It also directly answers our original question. Top predators like wolves have to be rare because there's just so little energy available way up at the tiny point of the pyramid. And it shows us why the whole system is so sensitive. If you have a problem at the base with the plants, it's going to send shockwaves all the way to the top.
Ultimately, it's probably best to stop thinking about ecosystems as just a collection of different animals and plants. They're really dynamic energy systems. Who the organism is matters less than its job, its role in capturing, transferring, and using that precious energy.
And that leaves us with one last big thought. If every single level is built on the energy of the one below it, and there's this massive 90% energy tax at every single step, what happens to the entire pyramid when one of those levels gets damaged or even removed completely? It's a question that really shows you just how interconnected and maybe how fragile all life on this planet really is.